Good afternoon. My name is Myles. I am Kanaka Maoli, that is Native Hawaiian. I'm Japanese, I'm Irish, I'm Swedish, and I'm German. After about a decade of interracial marriage laws being overturned, my parents got mixed race married, had a bunch of mixed race babies, and moved us to the ideal place to grow up as mixed race, queer, indigenous, Asian American, and transgender. Yes, I'm only talking about the conservative, predominantly white, predominantly evangelical Bible Belt community of the Deep South. I had a great time. Everything was fine. Nothing bad ever happened. Jokes aside, no matter how many knocks I take at the place that raised me, the fact is that when I was 14 years old, it was there that I had an encounter with the living and resurrected Jesus. A Jesus who came to me in all of the identities that I hold and conveyed to me, he got it. He got me. And so I said yes to that. I said yes to faith, to trust, to vulnerability. And I said yes to Christian communities who inherited a legacy of Bible interpretation that only knew how to see people like me as sick, as broken, a pathology, something to be prayed away, something to be erased. But I'm still here, not to fix that for them. I'm here because I had an encounter with Jesus. And my loyalty is to him. So, how was Jesus good news to someone like me? In the Gospel of John, we read that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Jesus is the living expression of all that God is and all that God wills. Jesus comes as a human being and whom embodies God's design for humanity. But what good news was that exactly? I learned that Jesus was from Galilee and Jesus was Jewish, living under Roman occupation. Jesus was fully divine and fully human. Jesus' bothness is what got him in trouble and what bridges the chasm between divine and human. It's his bothness that he came to save and to liberate. Jesus was good news to me because he knew what it was like to be asked, but where are you really from? Jesus was good news to me because he knew what it was like to be asked, what are you? The efficacy of Jesus' salvation to me did not happen in spite of his multiplicities, his mixedness, his in-betweenness, but in and through and because of his hybridity. Mujerista theologian Jeanette Rodriguez is going to talk about this as mestiza spirituality. Asian feminist theologian Rita Nakashima-Brock will describe it as interstitial integrity. And queer Asian theologian Patrick Chang will present it through what he calls rainbow theology. In the life and identities of Jesus, we are all invited to break down simple dichotomies that have been handed to us from whiteness. Dichotomies that say you're insider or outsider, colonized or colonizer, east or west, masculine or feminine, not just in our theologies, but in our own bodies. To me, one of the reasons this is so hard to do is because patriarchy predated white supremacy. It predated colonialism. And yet it took on a very specific form of violence through the rise of Western imperialism. Western imperialism has always constructed hybridity as a result, as enemy, impure, broken, mongrel. Western imperialism did this in order to codify what poet, professor, scholar Audre Lorde calls the mythical norm. The idea that, one, objectivity of perspective is even possible, and two, that it's possible through the worldview of white, heterosexual, able-bodied, affluent men. The further you away further away you were from those identities, the less credible your story. You see, white patriarchy seeks to do one thing, and that is to legislate who has the ability to make change or to maintain the status quo. And mixed experiences get in the way of all of that. White patriarchy assumes and enforces the inferiority and subordination of all women, gender nonconforming, and gender diverse people when they're white or when they're not. It shuffles people into a continuum of masculinities approximate to itself and treats those masculinities accordingly. So, if white masculinity is here, and you're perceived as a black or Latino man, you're superhumanized, hypersexualized, treated like you're dangerous, you're too powerful, you're violent, you're over-masculine. But if white masculinity is perceiving you as indigenous, Asian, Middle Eastern, or African descent, you're subhumanized and desexualized, treated like you're docile, impotent, dominable, effeminate. This is racist, it is sexist, and it's why we can't talk about gender without talking about race. We can't talk about race without talking about gender. And I'm going to argue today that we can't talk about any of these things if we keep pretending that there's no link between Christian theology and the staggering rates of poverty, violence, and murder being committed against transgender and femme people of color who don't fit into sexuality. And I want to close by again turning our attention to Jesus. Our Jesus who had nowhere to lay his head because he's in both worlds and yet he belongs to neither world alone. Like Dom said last night, because Jesus came from heaven to earth in his bothness, he is our ultimate solidarity. If we want to get free, we have to enter into a new transformation of our minds. One where we learn to unlearn the voice of God is one and the same with exclusionary interpretations of Scripture. One where we learn to unlearn the voice of God as anything except able to hold and set free all of our identities across the lines of race, gender, sexuality, disability, and class. Amen.